November 30th, 1989. Aileen Wuornos has led a life of crime and debauchery, and tonight she will segue into murder. What follows is the emergence of one of history's most renowned serial killers. In 2003, Charlize Theron portrays Aileen in a brutal, almost empathetic look at Wuornos' life. Prepare to journey into the mind of a monster. And this is inspired by a true story. Welcome to True Crime for Cinephiles. This is Inspired by a True Story, a podcast devoted to keeping artists honest. We will discuss the overall details of the actual crimes, then review the film on its own, how much that is true, and how much was Hollywood magic. I'm Aaron Peterson, an accredited film critic for the Hollywood Outsider podcast and website, and devoted true crime follower. And joining me today, as always, are my fellow film critics and true crime fans, John Davenport.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me again.
And Amanda Sink.
Hello, hello.
John, why do you always say thanks for having me? You're literally on the show.
I don't know, man.
You're not a guest. You're part of it.
I just kind of figured that at some point you guys are going to figure out I don't know what I'm doing and you're going to get rid of me at any point.
Oh, we figured that out a long time ago. We just kept you on.
Oh, is that?
Yeah, it's
really?
like a pity project. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Building you from the inside up.
I feel better now.
This was an interesting watch because I will say, and this is sad, right? This is one of my film critic blind spots. I had never actually seen all of Monster. I had seen portions of it. I had never seen the whole film.
That's incredible to hear. That's because Monster is such an important movie for the time in which it was released.
I know. It's shame on me. Shame on me. I watched several scenes because I know she was up for the Oscar, and I wanted to. It was a matter of timing. I just never came back to it. One of those things. So I'm curious. You guys both had seen this previously. Did it hold up as well as you remembered it?
For me, it actually didn't hold up as well as I remembered it because I had a much different view of what I was seeing back in 2002 when the movie was released. It felt much darker. Everything just felt more intense than it was the second time in viewing it. The second time, I realized that I'm watching something from a unreliable narrator and it has a completely different feel to it. It's almost more sympathetic now than it was back then, even though the movie hasn't changed.
I saw it only a year ago, so it's fairly recent in terms of my viewing history. I would say that I was surprised by Charlize's performance. Like, I knew it was great, and I knew that this was everything that I was supposed to, be expecting. But in the same respect, she don't look like Charlize. She don't act like Charlize. And to go that far out of character into someone that in some respects I sympathize for and in other respects realize this is a monster. This is a monster. Because, it progresses. You see her character develop throughout the film. And I don't think I fully knew what I was getting into. What I'll say is, because I did rewatch some of this, I didn't need that. I was good. I was good with just a one-time thing.
It's not a repeat,
you know what I mean?
Not a repeat viewing movie for you.
No. And I feel like we're probably going to have that decent amount through some of our episodes, but this is definitely one of them for me.
I understand. There's a lot of sexual assault, and that's a hard one for you personally. I know that from previous movies that you've talked about.
Yeah.
One thing is, I'm not trying to name drop, okay? But Amanda and I were at South by Southwest a few years ago.
Boom!
Yeah. And Charlize... Hang on.
Calm it down.
Yes.
Jesus.
I have a really funny story with this.
And so we were at a film premiere of Long Shot, which was Seth Rogen and Charlize Theron. So she was there in person, right? In person, 5 feet from us. I mean, she's literally right in front of us. Absolutely stunning woman in person. I'm sure nobody's shocked by that. Like, really? She's pretty? Yes, she's gorgeous. Absolutely stunning woman.
She's even more beautiful in person.
She really is. Yeah, it's kind of ridiculous. It makes you want to go home and reevaluate every choice you've made in life. Because how did that happen to her? I didn't get this attractive. I've tried.
I feel like she doesn't even have to try either. She's like got airbrushed flawless skin. She's got beautiful energy. I don't know.
Definitely deserve an Oscar for special effects for making her that less attractive. It's something. Christina Ricci apparently said, "No, I'm going to look just like I always do, and it's going to have to work for you." but Charlize, she really did a number, and I only mention that just because you don't realize how much she changed her face. I mean, sure you do. You've seen her in a bunch of movies, but when you met her in person, and you're like, she looks nothing like this woman, and it really works throughout the film.
So other than name dropping, the funny part about this for me is I took so many pictures and videos because there was also an impromptu concert.
Oh, Boys to Men showed up, yeah.
Yeah. And so I got real close and got my rose. But I have so many pictures and videos of her on my phone that, you know how Google Photos will like try to categorize people for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's a Charlize category.
That's kind of amazing.
That's pretty great. Although, I mean, the way you guys start talking about her, it's almost like you guys happen to go to the zoo and see something that just does not belong.
Yeah, it felt like that. We go to these festivals every year, and you always run across the actors. And normally, I'm not a starstruck person. I'm really not. I just, I've sat across a lot of celebrities, and they're just people to me in general. For whatever reason, she is one of the few that when you see her, she takes your breath away. She really does. She kind of has an aura of her own. And a lot of actors are just actors, they're just people, just everyday people you'd meet on the street. For some reason, she doesn't act like that. She doesn't act like she's better than anyone. She's very, very cordial. She was nice to everyone there, and it wasn't like Hollywood nice. I mean, she felt genuine. I just think she has that aura about her. Some people have that magic. Yeah,
the Hollywood star. Like I equate it to the modern day. If in the 1960s I were alive and I were to run into Audrey Hepburn, and that's what I equate this to.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
It's just that energy, that beauty, and like when they are in you're like, how are you an actual human being? This isn't fair.
Yep.
Like there are categories in life, and you and I are very, very far apart from each other.
And I've seen her twice because she was at Atomic Blonde too at South by, same festival, different year and same vibe. So it's just something that she has. But she went to great lengths to make herself less Charlize in this movie, and I understand why she won the Oscar. I really do.
Yeah.
Now we're going to talk about the movie, but first we got to talk about the crimes. The crimes are more of what this podcast is about than the movie, but I want to tell you about the film that was inspired by these crimes. 2003's Monster was written and directed by Wonder Woman's Patty Jenkins and starred Charlize Theron as Aileen Wuornos, or also Lee, as she's more commonly known, a Daytona Beach prostitute who elevates to the status of serial killer. It co-stars Christina Ricci as Selby, her eventual girlfriend. Patty Jenkins had unprecedented access to Wuornos, and even received hundreds of letters she had written or received to better understand her life. Charlize Theron won the Best Actress at the 2004 Oscars for this particular performance. And I think Christina Ricci goes a little unappreciated in this. I think she's wonderful as well.
I always enjoy her. But I mean, it's really tough to make that comparison.
Sure.
When you have Charlize, who has done a complete transformation, and you see that difference in her. And Christina, she's great, but she's always great. And so it was kind of like, yeah, we've seen this.
Wow.
I don't mean that to sound mean. I don't mean that to sound mean.
I mean, Christina did have to walk around with that mullet, so.
Oh, you're right. Yeah,
like, that's almost as bad of what Charlize did to herself. So
she's so tiny compared to Charlize Theron too.
Yeah,
she's like a little tiny
person. Yeah.
All right. Well, new episodes are released every 2 weeks and can be found wherever you listen to podcasts, or at thehollywoodoutsider.com or inspiredbyatruestory.com. They go to the same place. You can also hear episodes by supporting the show, and you can hear them early at patreon.com/thehollywoodoutsider, because we are sponsored by the Hollywood Outsider Network. Now, film and true crime fans are always debating how true their true crime is. So let's investigate Aileen Wuornos and Monster. Here are the overall details of the crime, and please be warned, our episodes deal with crimes that may contain violence and adult themes, and this podcast is intended for a mature audience. November 30th, 1989. Aileen, or Lee Wuornos, kills her first victim, Richard Mallory, a middle-aged electronics store owner in Florida. Mallory was 51 at the time and picked up a prostitute along I-75 for sex. He was found several miles from his car, shot in the chest repeatedly. Wuornos claimed he attempted to rape her, and he had previously served a 9-year sentence on assault and attempted rape, though nothing since then. Reported missing on May 19, 1990, David Spears, a construction worker, became her second victim, whose body was found on June 1, 1990. He was found naked in Citrus County and was shot 6 times in the torso. June 6, 1990. Charles Karskadin, a part-time rodeo worker, was her third victim. He was found shot 9 times in the chest and torso. Troy Burris was a sausage salesman from Ocala, Florida, and he was reported missing on July 31st, 1990. His body was found on August 4th, 1990, with 2 bullet wounds. July 30th, 1990. Her fifth victim was Charles Dick Humphreys, a retired Air Force major, former police chief, and child abuse investigator for the state of Florida. He was found on September 12th in Marion County with several shots to his head and torso. His car was found in Suwannee County. Walter Antonio, a truck driver and part-time security guard, was found on November 9th, 1990 in Dixie County with 4 shots to the back and head. The car was found almost a week later in Brevard County. Peter Seams, a retired merchant seaman and member of a Christian ministry outreach program, his car was found on July 4th, 1990. Witnesses ID'd Tyra Moore and Lee Wuornos abandoning Seams' car off State Road 15, and Wuornos was even said to have ripped the license plate off with her bare hands. When the fire department questioned them later, they denied any involvement. Seams' body was never found. I just want to note it's pronounced Tyra. It's spelled Tyria, but it's pronounced Tyra. She pronounces it herself, Tyra. I don't. So just so you know as we talk about her. And it's an interesting relationship because they were together for a very long time, very many years before all this happened. But in the movie, it's really depicted as a very, very slow build, very quick relationship. Aileen Wuornos was arrested on January 9th, 1991, after police completed an extensive investigation, aka they found her fingerprints on pawned items belonging to victims and cigarette butts left in the car. She wasn't Kaiser Soze levels of stealth.
Sorry. It was funny.
Tyra Moore had seen the sketch of Wuornos and abandoned her to flee back to her sister's home in Pennsylvania. Moore was convinced by authorities to get Wuornos to confess rather than become a suspect, which she did, even testifying in exchange for immunity. Moore was set up in a motel, made repeated calls to Wuornos, and continued to bait the hook, begging Wuornos to confess so her family would stop being harassed. She even at one time stated she might kill herself. On January 16, 1991, Aileen Wuornos confessed to the murders, but stated she did so in complete self-defense because these men were attacking her or attempting to rape her. Now, there's a little bit more on Aileen, but anything you want to speak to before we move on?
It's always tough in this one where you have somebody who is saying that they were defending themselves from something happening. You know, does that happen to prostitutes, to sex workers? Yes, it obviously has, and it does happen. And so did some of these maybe start out that way, and then she got the thrill of trying to get her revenge? And, you know, I think that's kind of more what we see in the movie from Monster, is we see that progression where, okay, sure, you know, some really terrible things have been happening to her. And she obviously doesn't like the fact that these men are willing to, in her eyes, take advantage of women who are in need of financially supporting themselves to get their kicks, you know. And but then it comes into do two wrongs make a right.
It becomes a look at mental health in general, because if you look at the history that she grew up with, it's not great. I mean, her father was diagnosed with, I think it was schizophrenia, and he ended up killing himself in prison. She obviously showed signs, at least through some of the reading I've done on her, that she likely followed in her father's footsteps as far as her mental health was concerned. Her mother wasn't the greatest of people, in the sense of abandoning them, putting her in a situation in which, from the age of 11, she starts using her body as a way to
get things.
You know, she's using her body as a way to get cigarettes, get money, get rides, get all these things. And it just never at any point does it ever become something in which she's, you know, feeling cared for other than that. And I think that's why in the movie, they kind of gloss on why she develops this relationship with a woman, because she's been taken advantage of by men her entire life. So, you know, not being a person who's able to see how the murders actually went down, it's possible that she started seeing these murders as a way to justify what had happened to her in the past, or use it as a way to fuel it to get her through it, so that she can then get more of what she needs to be able to keep moving forward.
And the one she seemed most adamant about was that Mallory, the first one, and obviously nobody was there.
Yeah.
Some people have theorized that the first one was actually retaliation, and that spawned in her the belief that it was she needed to take out these people and also rob them and everything else. I mean, these are theories. I mean, the evidence supports whatever it supports, and there's more on what she actually said as she was led to death row that we'll come to soon, but nobody knows. That's the thing. Only she really knows. Only she knows. And she's no longer with us.
That's only a maybe, because
sure, she's mentally ill for sure.
Yeah.
And it's going through somebody's perspective anyway.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, that's kind of a lot of, unfortunately, when it comes to a situation like that, there's room for gray area is what I'll say, I guess. And communication in the 90s wasn't like it was today. Today, it's like you say pineapple and everything stops, right? Like they weren't talking about it back in the 90s.
You say upside down pineapple, it stops. I don't know what you mean by pineapple.
I was going to say, why are you saying pineapple, Amanda?
That's just an example of a word.
Okay.
Right?
Well,
okay.
Some people...
It did stop the whole podcast, so you're accurate. 100%.
Yeah. You said pineapple. We're like, whoa, what's happening here? This is getting a little weird.
You guys just know too much about upside down pineapple.
Where do my keys go at this point?
Next door.
Continue.
No, I mean, that's all. I just think that to add on to the fact that we only have her perspective from that. We obviously don't get to hear, you know, his side of the story, and nobody else was there or witness to it. But you add in the circumstances or the condition of the time of that moment of when it happened, and you have somebody who's a sex worker, somebody who's paying for sex, and some things, depending on the sex worker, sometimes it's, you know, you have no limits. Sometimes it's you have limits when I say so. And, you know, so I think that and I'm not saying one way or the other how this situation fell. I'm just saying back in the 90s, especially, I can't imagine that they're having great communication during the act to be like, no, this is too far. Yes, this is acceptable. Hey, is it okay if I kiss you or touch you here? You know what I mean? Like, I think there's just more ambiguity, especially at that time.
I distinctly remember when I watched it the first time, it never crossed my mind that this was happening in 1990. In my brain, for some reason, it was like, oh, this is early 80s, late 70s. But when I was watching it this time, I go, I never even considered when this was happening. This was happening in Fort Florida. the 1990s. I know where I was at the time. I know what I was doing around the time. This whole set of murders never once popped up on my radar as a kid, because I think at the time I was 12, 13 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So never once did it ever pop up on my radar. And here it is. Like, I'm like, wow, it's so interesting to see how crime has changed, how investigations have changed, how everything around us has changed to the point where it is just harder, because I don't think if Aileen was doing this now, would she have been able to get as far as she did in that year?
Right. Yeah, that's
probably
fair.
not. Yeah, probably not.
Right.
I mean, it's a sad story. And it's interesting how the movie illustrates things versus how the story seems to go. And the victims' families are not happy about this movie at all, because they feel like it just paints their family members not as victims, but as almost assaulters in respect to the crimes themselves. And I understand their take on it. And we're going to get more to that when we talk more about the movie here in a minute. But let me finish a little bit on Wuornos. So January 14th, 1992, Wuornos went on trial for the murder of Richard Mallory. On January 27th, 1992, she was convicted of Mallory's murder and subsequently sentenced to death. Wuornos was tried and convicted for the murders of her other victims and received additional death sentences. I guess you can only have one death sentence, so I don't understand how court works sometimes.
They can give you multiple
Apparently,
for each one.
We're going to kill you 3 times, over and over and over.
In reality, if somehow they overturn one, she's still getting the other death. And if they, for each one, they can still overturn each one of those death sentences. So that's what it's really doing.
So you're killing the joke too. So the joke got a death sentence too.
Yeah.
They're just backups.
Yeah.
Pretend her death penalty is Beyonce, and all of the individual ones are all of Destiny's Child except Beyonce. You got the one, and you got that in front, and it's like the most important, but they're all connected.
Oh.
Amanda.
You see what I'm saying?
No,
we can't have Beyonce as an example.
Yeah, we're not part of the Beehive.
Can we move back to Aileen Wuornos? That would be cool.
Sorry.
So Wuornos' case gained significant media attention, partly due to her status as one of the few female serial killers. Aileen, once again, Lee Carol Wuornos, was born on February 29, 1956. Her father was convicted of child molestation after she was born and killed himself in prison, probably just like Epstein. Her mother abandoned her and her father when they were young, so Lee and her brother Keith lived with her mother's parents. At 11, Wuornos began trading sex for money, alcohol, or cigarettes. She had a child at 14, which she put up for adoption, her only child ever. Her family kicked her out of the house, and she began living in the woods or on the streets. That's when we say someone had a tragic upbringing. Look, I'm not trying to justify anything this woman did, but that is a like, if you want the blueprint to creating someone that's a monster, that's a blueprint.
And who knows what else, might have even happened with her and her father. You know what I mean?
There was some talk, there was some speculation from her, as well as, I think, family members, that her grandfather's friend had sexually abused her, as one of the people that sexually abused her. Much like she spoke to in the movie. Lee met Tyra Moore at Daytona Beach in 1986, and the two were together until Wuornos' arrest in 1991. Moore claimed to not be involved in the murders, and again was instrumental in Wuornos' confession. It should be noted that Tyra Moore and several police officers, including Sheriff Dan Moreland, Captain Vinegar, Sergeant Munster, and Major Dan Henry, were all allegedly involved in movie discussions just prior to Wuornos' official arrest. which documentation shows there was a movie proposal by Republic Pictures, but nothing signed and no money was exchanged. Just goes to show people were profiting off this woman. Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection on October 9th, 2002 at Florida State Prison, just like the movie said, which she herself helped expedite by recanting her claims of self-defense. So that's what I meant when I said earlier. At the end, she retracted her statement that it was self-defense and said there was no self-defense involved. It was murder. So that helped expedite her execution. Now, some have claimed that she did that because she was tired of the life she was living and she wanted to be put out of her own misery. I'm sure there's truth to that, too. There's probably a kernel of truth to everything in this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when you really think about this entire case, it's disturbing, sad. It's all around tragic for everybody involved. I know people don't want to say that a serial killer can be seen as tragic. I can see this woman as tragic. I think her whole story is tragic. And also what she did to those people is tragic. You can see tragedy all around. You don't have to just limit it to the victims that are current. But she was a victim as a child, too.
Right. So, and that's the thing about this one that strikes me a little weird. I know that the world considers her a serial killer, but I find it hard to see her as a serial killer.
Well, she killed multiple people.
Right. I get it. However, my idea of a serial killer, more like this, like Dahmer or Bundy or any of those people who are, they have a lot of agency in what's happening around them to be in those situations, to kill people. This is somebody who keeps on finding herself in situations in which she then learns to eventually take advantage of because of her upbringing or whatever mental health issues she may have. I don't think it's the same sort of thing. You know, it's more like a monster of opportunity versus a monster of design.
So vigilantes are okay, basically?
I didn't say okay. I never said okay.
I don't even know if I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, I kind of see what you're saying, but also she went out looking for money and cars and things to pawn, ways to get. I mean, she was robbing these men and then just making sure that they were dead because she also hated them for what they represented, you know. So that to me still rings of a serial killer. Just more of someone who profited off of them, off of the murders, more than enjoyed the glee of sodomizing them or anything like that.
You had to go right for the sodomy, huh?
I go back to a point that I made. I can't remember if it was during Snowtown Murders or which episode it was, but at the end of the day, we've all had tremendous tragedy. Obviously, not everyone has had tragedy as extensive and as terrible as this tragedy for her childhood and what she had to deal with. But And it can make it understandable of why somebody would do what they do, but it doesn't make it excused for what they do. It would be different, I think, if fully they were self-defense and she didn't do all of the additional extra steps like robbing them and everything like that.
Pawning their material.
Trying to hunt down her next prey. I mean, I understand her motives to an extent. I can understand why someone could potentially be drawn to wanting to do that, but actually doing it is another thing.
Yeah, I mean, she did hunt her victims. It just, men made it easier, I think, than for other other serial killers are picking up prostitutes. She's the prostitute picking up the men. What's the difference? I mean, they're both selecting their victims that way.
Yeah, she just lured hers in a different way. You know, when you think of Dahmer, he found a way to.
I'd rather not.
He did lure some of his victims in too, but she has more opportunity, and I hate to say this as a woman, but you get to be a little bit more picky as a woman about who you sleep with.
Well, that hurts my feelings. Okay, that really hurts my feelings.
And it can hurt some of the feelings of men who are trying to get what they want and don't get it. versus women who realistically, a man will sleep with just about anybody if they're looking in the mood.
Hey.
I'm just saying, y'all lose all standards.
Okay.
All standards.
Look, I really
never once in my life.
Yeah. Not me either.
Never slept with an ugly person.
Never
a person
once in my life.
Everyone
That's 'cause
has
you're too
beauty
emotional.
inside if you look
That's
hard
it.
enough.
Oh, whatever, Aaron. Whatever.
I mean, that's also true. I may be somebody who would. Never mind. I'm not defending
She's
myself.
speaking generally, and generally
Right.
you are correct.
Yeah.
Generally, there's truth to what you're saying.
I mean, if you're the kind of guy who's out for yourself, which a lot of guys are, then yeah, that happens.
Especially the ones who are searching for a sex worker. I mean,
That's a whole different world. Like most guys are not searching for sex workers. Like I know that seems
they're
seems
just
to be
searching for easy women.
That's different. That's different.
And using emotional, like, I don't want to say abuse, but manipulation.
I am not defending like the male
I'm
community.
Just saying.
I'm not. I'm just saying, let's not generalize and say all of them are like this. Or
I'm not saying all.
I'm
not saying all. I'm not saying all. I'm just saying for women in general, it is easier to get a man's attention and him sleeping with you than a man trying to get a woman's attention and her sleeping with you.
That's a fair statement.
So she has more capability of luring in these individuals, and she knows that. What she did is she said, look, I don't have anything but my body, and all you care about with me is my body. And I don't like that you don't respect me. I don't like that you're abusing me, because I've experienced this my whole life of people using me for my body, or my dad using children for their body, or whatever it may be. And so she gets to a point where she's like, no, I'm tired of this. Somebody is going to be the one to say something or do something, and I'm going to do it. Is this excusable? No, I'm just saying I can understand why she felt inclined to do it from a psychological standpoint, not why she actually was capable of doing it. That's a different thing.
Aaron, I get the feeling that Amanda's kind of sitting there saying that she would never really kill a man, but she understands why she would.
If hypothetically, okay, hypothetically, if a man abused me, would I want that individual dead? Hypothetically, probably, John. Would I be the one to do it? Nah. But would I want it? Hypothetically, probably.
No, you'd probably just call up a friend and be like, you can ask no questions, but the code word is cantaloupe. And they show up with a mask.
Hey, this is getting
cantaloupe
weird.
Okay, but pineapple wasn't.
This is weird. This whole conversation is turning weird. Let's move on to something that I find interesting. In the movie version, I found no truth to how true this is that Aileen Wuornos was out trying to get a job, but I'm sure she was. She was with Tyler Moore for a long time. And I'm sure at some point she tried to go straight in her life. I do see a lot of truth in that, where, it's the same problem we have with, I would say, nonviolent offenders when they come out of prison, or someone with a history of prostitution. When they're trying to get a job and set their life back on a positive path, there is no hope, no help or hope for them. Many times it's hard, very difficult for them to get work, and still to this day. And that part is a truth that I still see in America that's not right. We're supposed to believe in reforming and redemption and the ability to change your life, but yet we don't want to give people the opportunity to do so. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah. I mean, just look at pretty much every employer in America that's going to say, and why we have all these individuals that have served their time and can't get a job because the system is not actually set up for them to rehabilitate. It's set up for you to do what you need to do, get really depressed, maybe get a degree, apparently. And then when you get out, what's helping you from that happening, from the same situations not reoccurring? Pretty much nothing. I think all of us want to say we believe in rehabilitation, but if that person who committed, let's say, like a child sex crime was the parent of a kid in your kid's classroom and they showed up for like family day, would you be cool? Probably not.
Well,
just
I
saying.
mean, let's be honest. That person wouldn't be allowed in a school.
Yeah, I think I'm okay with that one.
I'm saying after they've served their time and they did all their stuff, you know what I mean? Okay, let's say they abused an adult then. We'll change the scenario. My point, regardless, is we're not as okay. Like, we all have a line where we say, no, you can't come back from this.
Yeah, that's fair. That is fair.
Like, you can't come back from this for me. I don't care what you did to do what the justice system says that you did enough of to get out and to be free. But I don't have to allow you to be anything that I can control. I don't have to allow that, is how I think most of society thinks.
And I still don't think, this is a personal opinion, I don't think prostitution should be in the same vein as sex assaulter or abuser or bank robber. I mean, to me, this has always been one of those things where I'm like, it's her body. You know, this is her choice. I mean, don't we believe that as society? Her body, her choice. Why are we?
No.
No.
Well,
I know
not anymore.
Yeah, I get that, but I'm just saying we should be. And I don't understand, why should you go to prison? These are laws that I think are archaic, but that's a whole other argument that we shouldn't even.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree, because if it's about protecting people per se, why wouldn't we protect these women who are?
Those are consensual acts for the women. If they say they consented,
if they consent,
I don't see the problem with it.
That's
It's your
their
body.
choice.
You want to get paid for it? Knock yourself out. I don't know. That's a weird thing. Anyway, I'm sure some people listening to this are very, very offended that I have that opinion, but I do. I'm not ashamed of it. All right. So Monster, the movie. As a standalone film, you know, I don't know what you knew of the case. John, it doesn't sound like you knew much about the case before you saw the movie.
No, I didn't.
What did you think when you're watching? You're like, oh man, this happened in Florida?
Yeah, my first response was, yeah, this is clearly Florida. My second response was, wow, I lived an hour away from most of this happening. And then my third response was, damn, Charlize, what the hell?
Yeah, she gained 30 pounds for the role. We already talked about her transformation. And there is one thing that I think is interesting, because they do make her a very empathetic character in the movie.
Very much so.
Very much so. Now, I'm curious what you guys think about that when you now have the research of her crimes and what she did. Do you think the movie was playing fair? Like, if this, let me put it this way. Let me put it in this perspective, right? If this was a male serial killer, same upbringing, did the same things, but did them to women, do you think the film would still represent him as sympathetic and empathetic as they do in this one? Haha. It's a legitimate question.
I think we would have a harder time seeing it that way if that were the case, because I don't remember feeling so sympathetic or empathetic with her the first time I viewed it. It's not until I viewed it this time that I start having those sorts of like, wow, she's really going through something here, or at least giving her the benefit of the doubt. This story does feel very much like a unreliable narrator telling you a story, because it's in some cases it feels, though still grounded in reality, it's still kind of fantastical as well. There's a lot of things that happen where it's like that there's no way in real life that would happen. I don't know. It just doesn't feel the way it would feel if it was more of a grittier, more reality-based story. And I think it really plays with that unreliable narrator feel.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't think that this movie is intending to come across like a documentary, but I do think that it's smart in the manner of, again, not coming across like a documentary, because it's trying to be a narrative feature about her and from her perspective to an extent, but without making it seem like she's completely innocent or relinquished of being a monster. Like, it does show her as being a terrible human being, especially in her relationship. Like, you really get to see all sides of her, in my opinion. And I think the reality is, if they wanted to minimize her as a bad person, they would have kept Charlize looking like Charlize. And I say that because science backs up that people are more inclined, society as a whole are more inclined to see and perceive someone as innocent if they're well kept and beautiful.
Is that why you get away with so many things?
Yeah, 100%. But I mean, that's kind of the reality. So I think that they made an intention in the movie of her looking the way that she did. And because of the way she looked, she's demonized. Society will demonize her. And you see her progression of how, maybe at first we felt like I can empathize or sympathize with this woman and why she's feeling the way she's feeling. But eventually you get to a point where you're like, girl, you done lost it. You done lost it.
Yeah. I mean,
so like, it's not okay anymore.
In the first kill, it's very much portrayed as a self-defense. The second kill is very much portrayed as she's amping herself up to pull it off. She basically psychs herself up because the guy is doing nothing but, himself at that point in time. And there's no sign of him trying to physically assault her or him trying to do anything. All he's doing is acting as if he's made his transaction and he's ready to keep going with the transaction. And she starts amping herself up to be able to pull off this murder. And then she starts throwing out multiple words that don't even mean anything to this guy about being a child molester or doing this or doing that. And it's just lines that she's connected in her head, inadvertently or on purpose to be able to get to this outcome. So it's you definitely see her go down that mental health spiral of no good.
I do think writer and director Patty Jenkins did a good job in telling this story. It is very much, you keep saying an unreliable narrator, and I would agree with that. I think she's telling the movie from her perspective. The whole point of
For sure.
this story is from her perspective, and her perspective, you have to remember, is damaged. Like, she sees herself in a much different light than everyone else around her, as anyone who has committed horrible acts usually does. It's kind of like the old adage that the best villains in film are the ones that believe in what they're doing. They don't believe they're the bad guy. It's the same concept.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And that's what a lot of this is, but they do build several blocks to make sure that the audience is on her side throughout. When she lets the developmentally delayed man go, that felt very much like an orchestrated attempt to make us feel empathy for her because she can see
for sure
that this is there's no harm in this man. And so she lets him go. And the last murder that she commits, she has basically an emotional breakdown as she shoots him in the back of the head because she doesn't want to do it. She has to do it in her mind, according to that. Now, how much of this is accurate? There's no documentation on this. There is the fact that Patty Jenkins had access to Aileen Wuornos, and there's the thought that she told her many of these stories. And, it's from that narrator, that unreliable narrator, that comes from. Which brings me to the bigger question of what the movie got right and did it respect the victims. This is where I will say it did get a lot right. There's a lot of things in this film that happened in real life, but I would say myself, I don't think it respects the victims at all.
No, it doesn't seem to respect the victims, but to counter that, how do you respect the victims in this case is my first question. Like, how do you find a way to make these victims, even with the guy who beat her up, there's no way to really bring him back from this. The guy, and the rest of the guys, I mean, inherently, because of what they're trying to do, we can sit there and we kind of sneer at them. So what would you do to make that more respectful?
Well, let me ask you a question. What's the difference between someone soliciting sex and the person offering sex for money? Why is one a darker evil than the other? If they both sides play fair and they're not physical or harmful in any way, it's all consensual.
Right.
Why is one seen as a darker sin?
It's just gross. Guys are just gross.
Understood, but I'm just saying.
Yeah. It's not. What you're digging at, it's not a darker sin.
I'm playing devil's advocate here, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, what you're digging at, it's not a darker sin per se. However, when guys are seen put in this light where they're just animals just trying to get off real quick, it never looks good. There's no way to make it look good because there's something in our psyche that sits there and says, when guys are all like hunched over and they got their wang in their hand and like, all right, let's do this. We're like trolls, and it's not great.
Thanks for that visual. I want to appreciate
Yeah, that kind of hurt me. That was,
But it's my point. Try to picture any guy who's, okay.
You've already ruined that for me. I'm not going to do that again. No.
Even if, who's a good looking guy who probably is inhuman and just like Charlize?
Brad Pitt.
All right. Let's say Brad Pitt. Brad Pitt is going to pay a sex worker for a good night of sex. And he is really raring to go. And what's he going to do? He's going to rip his pants off. He's going to sit there and be like all hunched over, being like, yeah, let's go ahead and do this. And it's not going to be a pretty sight. And you're never going to be able to see it as a pretty sight. It's just not the way we as a society have grown up. I mean, when guys are in this mode, we picture them as trolls.
I'm so glad I was raised by my mother. I don't see things this way. Go ahead, Amanda. What were you going to say?
I would just add that potentially the difference between soliciting and offering is the motive. It's the intention. A person who is offering typically is somebody who has had a really hard upbringing, who doesn't have means of even obtaining identification potentially to get a job or to do things the right way, or they don't have the resources to do so. And some of them have been trafficked into that world. And to your point, Aaron, become accustomed to it to the point where they mentally are like, well, this is normal to me.
Yeah,
like
this is my
there
life.
are plenty of sex workers who, after they got out of it, who were like very avid for it, like, heck yeah, I'm making good money, I'm taking care of myself, whatever, who got out of it and realized it's because I was a child put into this world and I never knew anything different. I didn't know that that was not good or okay. I didn't see the harmful side of it. So at least from my perspective, it's you have one person who has the means and is using money to have an advantage over someone who doesn't have financial means to support themselves, and this is the best that they can do, and versus somebody who's just trying to stay alive.
That's a very fair representation. So I appreciate that. That's what I was asking for. Like, what's the difference? That's a very good explanation of what the difference would be.
And it's not that everyone is going to have that, but I would personally argue that, at least from what I know, a lot of them are in a bad situation in one way or another.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's talk about what the movie got wrong or left out. And was it worth it? Meaning, did it make the movie more entertaining? So, per an ABC News source credited to John Stossel, John Tanner, the prosecutor, was never consulted on this film. He said, these men had wives. They had daughters, brothers, sons, friends. And anyone that sees that film is left with the impression that at least some of the men that were murdered deserved to die and that she was acting in self-defense. It's a total lie. Now, that's from the prosecutor. Wuornos herself later recanted her self-defense claims. She said, and I quote, "I want to come clean. There is no self-defense. And so I need to come clean. I need to tell the world that there is no self-defense in my cases." Most of the victims' families were appalled by Monster, as it paints their family members as the true monster in their eyes. Letha Prater said, quote, "This movie is portraying her as a victim. She isn't. She was not a victim. My brother was not a victim." From that same ABC News report, they confronted Brad Wyman, who was a producer on Monster, and told them that Wuornos herself recanted her claims of self-defense, to which Brad replied, "I believe she said that in order to actually try to expedite her own execution, she really wanted to end her own personal tragedy. It is not a documentary. It is a dramatic portrayal searching for kind of a greater truth rather than a factual one." On that one, Brad, I would say, I don't know what's a greater truth than a factual one. A spiritual one?
Yeah. I think the facts are typically what I'm looking for when I'm looking for facts.
Feels like that's the wrong thing to say, Brad, and you probably should have deferred. Just saying. So what do you say about that? So right there, you have a prosecutor saying it's a total lie. You have Wuornos herself saying, "I want to complain. There is no self-defense." You have victims' family saying they're appalled by the movie. And you have a producer basically saying he believes that she said that in order to try to expedite her own execution, which many people believe, but that's not a fact. That's a belief.
Yeah, the thing is, with almost every single one of these statements, they're driven with bias, right? Like the prosecutor has a reason. He has incentive to defend his perspective that she was a terrible human being, because that's his job. His job was to prosecute her. When you have the victims' families, regardless of whether they did something right or they did something wrong, they're not going to see it that way because that's their loved ones. I mean, you look at a lot of cases, many cases, not all of them by any means, but a lot of them, people will say, they were such a good person, I don't think that they could do this. Or I love my family member so much, like I'll defend them to the end because it's loyalty. And so people are looking through their own rose-colored glasses when making these statements. The only one that I guess for the producer, I mean, he has his own incentive too to try to say like, hey, this,
go see my movie.
Go see my movie. She was just saying that because she wanted to end it all. And maybe there's truth to it. We don't know, but that's just speculation. And he also has a reason to say what he's saying. The only person that I think didn't anymore have a reason to lie would be her girlfriend. Like she accepted either direction, that I might have Aileen in my life, I might not have Aileen in my life, but at least I can do what's right, or I can potentially get myself safe. And again, even then, she might have some more ulterior motives. So it's all just speculation. Nobody knows. None of these people were actually there. And that's what makes this such an interesting one, is because you don't know for certain what happened.
All good points. Yeah. And even the Wuornos one, I don't want to agree with Brad Wyman because I think Brad should be quiet. But I will say I can see that perception. I can see, based on some comments as she made as she neared the end of her life, how miserable she was, how being alone in a cell 22 hours a day was wearing on her mental state, and she already had a pretty fragile mental state.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I could see her recounting that to expedite this, to make this pain end. I can see that. I
would.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it. It's no different than suicide by cop or things like those. Sometimes people just want out. I don't know if that's the case. No one knows if that's the case, because like Amanda said, no one was there, but I could understand the argument. But it does sound like she was a monster. No matter how she got there, she eventually became a monster.
Mm-hmm. By the end, in some form or fashion. I mean, I guess it also depends on how you feel about, so even if you do believe, hey, there was some level of self-defense in these, you have to also accept that at some point there wasn't self-defense anymore. And it was her just, I guess, trying to, quote unquote, rid the world of evil and become this vigilante that I think she had seen for herself, where now I have the power to take out these people. Like, you're not going to come for me anymore. I'm going to come for you. And so even if you agree that she had self-defense in the beginning, can you really agree that by the end she did? That's the part I struggle with.
I mean, the woman, I feel like, was also, although she was a monster, was also taken advantage of. There was a situation where her friend, Arlene Prawley, I don't remember which way to say that, but she was legally adopted by this friend, and later came to think that Wuornos believed that Prawley was only there for the publicity and the money, and I'm sure there's some truth to that. It feels like everybody was willing to capitalize on this woman once this is all done. That's what happens in our society. People flip, they get rich, they move on. It happens. So I can understand her just wanting out of this.
It sounds like a very Florida thing to do. Hey, you're about to become famous for bad reasons. Can we be friends?
It seems like just a thing to do. I don't know if it's just isolated to Florida. Don't get me wrong. Your state's weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what would we have done differently? John, would you have done anything differently with Monster?
The only thing I would try to do is figure out a way to make the victims a little bit more sympathetic than they were in this. again, in my whole like gross explanation as to why it would be hard, I think if you look at the one situation in which she let the guy go, that one guy becomes kind of sympathetic because he doesn't have power in the situation. He's just finds himself in kind of like the situation, and then as soon as she starts getting loud or anything, he loses any power that he could have had. The buyer seems to always have the power in the situation, and if they don't have the power, they take the power. If they found a way to balance that out quite a bit more, would be a better way to make her victims more sympathetic and pay more care to them.
For me, if I were a producer on the film, I would have gotten perspectives from other people, not just Aileen, because I think you automatically inherently skew yourself to one perspective when you only get one perspective. And I do think that was potentially a downfall of Patty's in terms of her method. I understand her vision. Her vision was to tell it from Aileen's perspective, so that's fine. But to be able to do some level of proper justice to the people who were victims, or potential victims, I guess, depending on how you feel, you have to at least hear the other side of the story. And when you hear the other side of the story, or you hear different perspectives, there's always a string of truth in it that you can pull from without leaning too far to one side. And so that's probably the one thing that I would have done differently.
Yeah, I mean, look, we kind of talked about this earlier, right? Just because of a victim that was murdered, solicited a prostitute, does not mean that they deserve to die. There are a lot. Hugh Grant, Eddie Murphy, people still like them, right? Well, guess what? They went and solicited hookers. It happens. It doesn't necessarily mean that these people were all monsters. I'm not saying that one or two or three of them might have been, but all of them, very unlikely. It's very unlikely. So if you're going to do a movie like this, and that's where we've talked about in the past, when you do a movie that's based on a true story or inspired by a true story, sometimes it's okay to go way off base, scream way off base. It's nothing like the actual case. But if you're going to tell a case that's very, very close to what happened, I think, like you're saying, Amanda, you owe it, and John too, you owe it to the film to get some other additional perspective and have some more empathy for the people that were murdered, because you don't know. Just because they had their own sickness that drove them to this doesn't mean that they were necessarily monsters that deserve this. And that's what I think is really kind of missing from the film. And granted, it's told from her perspective, but still, that's what I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. People you like also solicited prostitutes. Sorry.
I mean, if you knew how many elected officials have utilized those services,
I'd rather not. I already have.
You'd be shook.
Faith in Congress. Here's what I'll say. Okay, yeah. I wouldn't have done anything differently because it got Monster made, which means Charlize got an Oscar and Patty Jenkins was picked to make Wonder Woman, which is a fantastic film.
Ooh,
so we all win.
Love that.
We all win with this movie. We all won. We did.
Mm-hmm. And it got people to look into the story too.
Sure. Okay. Well, we're done with this podcast. So thank you guys once again for doing this. John, you're part of the show. You don't have to say thanks for having me, but thanks for being here.
Thanks for putting up with me.
That's fair. Amanda, thank you as well for being here and your insight.
Always. Thank you, Aaron, for leading us through every episode of Inspired by a True Story.
You know what, Aaron? Thank you for doing the lion's share of the work.
Absolutely. So anything that's wrong, John just made sure to creatively point the finger back at me.
100%.
Well played.
100%.
All right. Well, if you enjoyed this podcast, share the show on your social media outlets. Give us a review in your favorite podcast app. We are going to every 2 weeks from this point forward. So just so you know, it's an every 2 weeks podcast. We did the first 5 weeks, week to week, just to get you interested and you knew what the show was and subscribe. But from here on out, it's every other week. Please subscribe. Please share the show. Please give us a review. Those are the things we ask of you because you are the best source of promotion for this podcast. So tell your true crime maniac friends, go to Reddit, go to Facebook or X, or what are people using now? Do people use Threads? If you use Threads, if that's still around when you hear this, use that, whatever.
Right. Skywrite it. That's a good one too.
Oh man, if you got a plane, that would be awesome.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Inspired by a true story. It feels like it's going to take you a while, but get to it. You can do it.
You can also, if you go to the Fort Lauderdale Beach, you can go and rent one of those planes that has the big like sign that flies
banner
behind it. Yeah.
And also while you're there, write it into the sand.
Write it into the sand.
Helpful.
Yeah. Take a picture, send that to us on the socials. We'll do something with it.
Absolutely. And you can also email us if you have ideas to inspired@thehollywoodoutsider.com. It's inspired@thehollywoodoutsider.com. Tell us your thoughts on the show, the podcast, an episode, suggest a movie, whatever you want to do. Thanks for listening to Inspired by a True Story. And remember to never pick up hitchhikers. And let's keep those artists honest. Seriously, never pick up hitchhikers.
Like never?
Never.
All right. I got to make a couple phone
You're
calls.
in Florida.
They literally have signs for it, John.
I can't read.
Bye.